Start your wellness journey at Whole Foods Market, where it's Jumpstart January through the 16th. Stock up on supplements with some of the year's biggest savings. Plus, save on air-chilled organic boneless skinless chicken breasts, organic Honeycrisp apples, organic large Hass avocados, and more. And since Whole Foods Market is the only certified organic national grocer, it's easy to make them your wellness destination. Jumpstart your January now at Whole Foods Market.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Later in the show, we will hear from Professor Stefan Symanski from the University of Michigan, the author of Soccernomics, the original book on football finance. Professor Stefan, Kieran, Professor.
Yeah, but he's not being called a boffin by the Daily Star, so Yabu and sucks to him.
Yeah, that's such an English response, isn't it? Yeah, not being called a boffin by the Daily Star. It's very funny. I was unable to talk to him, so or either that or Guy felt that I was too immature to talk to him. So you did the interview, and I understand it was very interesting, Kieran. So I look forward to hearing it.
Yep,
good. But how was it good? Was it football finance expert talking to football finance expert? Was it hands across the sea?
Yeah, well, I was a bit of a fanboy because I read Soccernomics years ago, and that sort of accelerated my enthusiasm for the subject. And Stefan's an economist, and I'm more of an analyst. Except I sort of put the anal into analyst in terms of the way that I look at things. I'm quite obsessed. He's much smarter than I am, it was an honour for me to speak to him. I was absolutely chuffed.
Good, yeah. Please tell me that at no stage you said I put the anal into analyst.
Not during the interview, no.
Oh, good. That's good. And did you both of you take time off to have a go at Swiss Ramble just for a couple of minutes? It's Newsday, Kieran, and we do have some big news stories, of course, and some ongoing ones. First of all, UEFA have approved the new financial regulations to replace FFP now.
Yes, financial fair play is going to be no more. And the one thing which is very clear from what UEFA have said is that any form of competitive balance within football is dead. So if you've got any remaining element of romance in you whatsoever, which there hasn't been a lot. We're all clinging on to Leicester City in 2016. Yeah. Just say goodbye to this. It's very much a case of giving the big clubs exactly really what they wanted. No. They didn't get their own way with Super League, but what these new rules are going to do is that they're very much going to bake in the existing differences between the bigger clubs and the smaller clubs. There's going to be what they call three pillars under the new financial sustainability rule. So even the word fair, which I always felt was a misnomer, is going to disappear altogether. The first thing is I think it's pretty good. Is this called the overpayments rule? UEFA are going to have quarterly checks, and if you have outstanding money owed to the tax authorities or to players for unpaid wages or for transfers, they're going to send the boys round, and that will be in the form of it could be points deductions in respect of the Champions League, Europa League, and the Conference League. It could be fines. It could be expulsion. It depends. It depends on the extent. So they're going to use a fairly heavy stick. And the next bit, this seemed. This did confuse me because the talk is about sustainability. Well, under the current UEFA rules, you're allowed to lose up to €30 million over 3 years. And they're now saying under the new rules, you can lose up to 60 plus a further 10 million if you're in financial good health. Now, here's the paradox. If you're losing 60 million, by definition, you're probably not in financial good health.
Yeah.
So why are they allowing you to lose more? So that did seem a bit strange. But yeah, we'll have to take a look at the small print. And the third element, and this is where I really do think the existing gaps between football are going to be baked in, is that clubs are only going to be allowed to spend 70% of revenue on wages on players, head coaches, I think net transfer fees and agents' fees. So if you are Real Madrid and you've got 500 or 600 million, 70% of that is 350 million.
Yeah.
And if you're, say, a club like Palace who gets into Europe, you're starting off at 150 million, 70% of that is 105. So the big clubs, they start off with more money, so therefore they can pay the bigger wages, which means that they can attract the best talent.
Yeah.
And that cycle is baked in into the system to prevent any form of challenge or disruption. So the aim is not to prevent the likes of Manchester City and Chelsea and PSG, who have benefited from very benevolent owners historically. The aim is to prevent another Chelsea or PSG or Manchester City. Where this leaves Newcastle United, we're not sure. So that doesn't look great. You combine that with the two wild card entries to the Champions League, which are going to be based on your UEFA coefficient over the last 10 years, i.e., if you've been a big club in the last 10 years, if you're not capable of getting into the Champions League by finishing in the top four, we're still going to find a way of letting you in anyway. And isn't this what Super League clubs wanted?
Yeah, I'd be careful if I were you, Kieran. You got into enough trouble when you said you wanted Palace to win the FA Cup. Now you're talking about Palace being in Europe. I'd pick another example next time, Kieran. Do you know what's interesting? And we talked about this a couple of times recently about how there is still a lack of understanding about essentially what FFP was, and what it was for. And it's always based around that word fair. I was in a writing room today working on a pilot with 8 other comedians and writers, all big football fans. And of course, we were talking about football. There's a football show we're working on. And it's quite clear that most of them are very vague as to what financial fair play was brought in for and what the rules are. And I found myself in the unusual situation of people going, well, you do a football finance podcast. And obviously, having not paid that much attention, just saying some things. And I threw amortization in just to
always good,
just to impress them. But it's really interesting. But the understanding, 2 of them are Arsenal fans, still furious that Arsenal wanted to be in the Super League, but none of us had any real concept of what financial fair play is, and we still don't. And I don't think we're going to have any real concept of what it is in the future. And English football is on track to go down a similar path this summer as well, isn't it?
Yes, it looks as if the EFL in particular is going to introduce this soft wage cap where the amount that you can pay in wages is linked to the amount of revenue that you generate. Now, this is going to cause one or two issues, because if you are relegated from the Premier League, then you've got the benefit of an extra £40 million of parachute payments. So 70% of that is 28 million. If you've just come up from League One, you've probably come up on a wage budget of 6 or 7 million. We've got Fulham, who were relegated from the Premier League last year on a wage bill of 114. The champ, and that's why the Championship is this lunatic division, and spectacularly lunatic as well. And it's really great to see Coventry and Luton doing so well under such circumstances. But I think this is all part of the EFL's ambition to get more money out of the Premier League, and I can't see the Premier League voluntarily giving more money, although I think there is certainly a case for a complete review of distribution. We've discussed things like EPPP and how that really gives a huge advantage to Premier League clubs in terms of picking up all the best young talents. That means they don't have to go and pay transfer fees at a later stage. It is a mess, but to just have these rules introduced without a more comprehensive overview of finances, I think that it's going to repeat and rinse the cycle of yo-yo clubs that we're seeing. The likes of Rotherham, perhaps Barnsley, who potentially going to go down, and they came up a couple of years ago from League One and the Championship, and potentially Wickham as well. And then we've got clubs like Fulham, West Brom, Norwich, bouncing up between the bottom 3 or 4 of the Premier League and the top 3 or 4 of the Championship. And do we want that? I don't think people do. And yet, at the same time, in the Premier League, we accept that the top 4 are the same old faces, and nobody seems to give a damn.
That's true. Impressed by my knowledge of financial fair play in Europe in this meeting today, Kieran. Some of the young people say, "What's going on with Roman Abramovich? You clearly got the inside track." And I said, "Well, legally, lads, I'm not allowed to tell you a lot, but clearly, I said, what I can tell you is he's planning to buy a Spanish side or the Chelsea." And they were like, "Oh my God, how do you know that?" Oh, well, I didn't have the heart to tell them. The guy had put it in an email with the news stories, and it was clearly the public domain. But it's a strange one, because you would think Roman Abramovich would kind of want to keep his head down rather than make what I think is a sort of defiant statement about his plans to buy a Spanish club once he's got the money from Chelsea.
Yeah, this is a weird one. This is all to do with Valencia, who are currently owned by Peter Lim, who we mentioned, I think, last week when talking about Salford City. He owns 50%, and he is the person who we strongly suspect is the person who is funding the losses at Salford.
Yeah.
And this revelation came from a rival. It looks like Peter Lim is trying to sell Valencia for around about €250 million, and there are apparently 2 bidders, one of whom is a Spanish guy who has now gone to the press and say, "Well, I was planning to buy it, but Roman Abramovich is trying to buy it as well." And everybody goes, "What? Hey, you sure?" Because you would think that Roman Abramovich, has his hands tied. Because anybody that follows some of the unusual Twitter accounts can follow his aircraft around the world, and he does appear to be. One minute he's looking. He's got that Sphinx-like smile appearing in negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. The next minute he's off on a super yacht. And the next minute, we've got the Chelsea deal up for approval on, I think it's the 18th, or it looks like we're going to get a preferred bidder coming through in the next few days. So he's got his hands full. But this is the accusation, and also in respect of Roman Abramovich, the Jersey government and the French government have said, "Oh, by the way, Roman, you've got a load of assets, you've got a load of companies. We're freezing your assets." So how's he can't have that many places where he's got a spare €250 million to go and buy a football club. And what's going to be the reaction of the Spanish authorities and La Liga? So it does seem very odd indeed, if this rumor is true, and it has come. It's not, you never get very much out of Abramovich himself. This has come from somebody who said, "Well, I was going to buy Valencia, but now Roman Abramovich has entered the fray." Why?
What's interesting as well, Kieran, is that there are several stories over the weekend in various newspapers claiming that Abramovich is having to borrow money from wealthy friends, etc. But this story, if true, would clearly imply that he will be getting the money for the sale of Chelsea Football Club, which would come as a surprise to some people, wouldn't
it? Yes. Well, especially as he gave a public statement before his assets were frozen by the UK government, in that I'm putting Chelsea Football Club up for sale. And the net proceeds are going to the victims of the conflict in Ukraine.
Yeah.
So that's pretty unequivocal. There is no way the UK government will release funds from the sale of the club. That money will go into some form of frozen bank account. There will be separate. So whilst Roman Abramovich potentially will have some say, stroke influence as to who the new owners of Chelsea are, because ultimately he is the shareholder who is selling his shares, and it looks as if the Rain Group they've narrowed down the potential owners to 4, including Harrison Blitzer, who are part own Palace. We've got a new guy who's come in, who's sort of come out of the ether, really, but he owns 55% of Atalanta. There's the Ricketts Group, who probably are the outsiders, given some of the comments from Old Man Ricketts, which were pretty unpleasant. And then I think I'd say that the favourite is Todd Boehly, who mainly because his ability to buy the club involves less complications than the other, and that's the only reason why I think he's probably slightly ahead of the others at present. But Abramovich will have to be involved in that decision because it's his shares that are being sold, and then a recommendation will be made, and on the basis of that recommendation, here HM government and the Premier League will do their review. And if the proceeds of sale go through, it will go into a frozen bank account. There is no way on earth that the government is going to allow Roman Abramovich to pocket £2.5 billion from the sale of Chelsea Football Club.
Interesting as well, Kieran. All 4 of the favourites, we think the 4 from which the preferred bidder will be chosen, have made public statements about their willingness and desire to protect the heart and soul of Chelsea Football Club, which is something that perhaps the Glazers could look at, because we've talked long and hard on this show about Liverpool fans and various Liverpool groups like Spirit of Shankly, etc., who are determined to protect the club and what they feel is the ethos of Liverpool. And now Manchester United fans are determined to do the same, because they're planning a wave of concerted wave of protests against the Glazers, which they've said will be entirely peaceful, but they look like they're going to be in big numbers. And it's what's interesting as well is that essentially what they're saying is that the way the Glazers do business is contrary to the way that we want Manchester United to be run, and I'm fascinated by what the outcome of this will be. Is there any way they could make a financial damage to the Glazers here? Because they're not talking about boycotting games, so I assume that it's going to be nuisance value rather than anything else to the Glazers.
Yes, I mean, it won't look too good. I mean, Manchester United are at home to Norwich this weekend. Now, this is an organisation called the 1958 Group. And what they've said is we're going to boycott the stadium until the 17th minute. Right. 17 representing each year of Glazer ownership. And I think if we take a look at what's happened at United, and this isn't a criticism, because ultimately I can understand why some fans, but not all, and I know some really hardcore United fans who have walked away from the club in disgust, and who are still really, really angry. And that's why we have FC United and Manchester. That was set up as a protest. But I think it's fair to say that there have been at times where we've had the green and gold movement, and there's been a wave of anger against the Glazers, and then United win 3 or 4 matches and it disappears. So what the 1958 group are saying, the only way that the Glazers can be removed, and we are not advocating this or not advocating this, if there is a constant, relentless, legal and peaceful protest with regards to their ownership. So Manchester United is an amazing brand. It's worth a fortune to sponsors, and we saw last year that one of the United sponsors, called the Hut Group, they ended up pulling out of a sponsorship arrangement because Manchester United fans started to target the sponsors. And indirectly, they're hitting the Glazers. And I think that's the route which is most likely to generate a response. Now, I did some research on what's happened under the Glazers' ownership. And Manchester United were listed on the New York Stock Exchange in August 2012. Now, if you'd put £1,000 into Manchester United shares in 2012, those shares today would be worth £992.
Right.
That's a pretty poor return. Yeah, your money's gone down. If you'd invested it just in the Dow Jones average, it would be worth 2,464. So you more than double. You doubled your money and more. If you put your money into Tesla, I think you've ended up with something like 173,000. So but that's the vagaries of the stock market. Sometimes it's very successful, sometimes it's not.
Well, sorry, Kieran, I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but I'm just slightly confused by that figure. If that's the case, why is it that we're constantly reading about the Glazers paying themselves huge dividends every year?
Well, that's a separate issue.
Right.
The argument I think put forward by the 1958 group and others is that they wouldn't, if Manchester United were winning trophies, they wouldn't actually mind the Glazers because the dividend is a reward.
Right. Okay.
They've not delivered very much since 2012. When the club has made profits, the Glazers have paid themselves a dividend. When Manchester United have lost money, the Glazers have paid themselves a dividend.
Oh, right.
And all of that money could have been reinvested in the squad. The club will say, well, actually, if you take a look at the numbers, over the course of the last decade, we've spent practically, certainly since about 2015, 2016, Manchester United have spent more money in the transfer market on a net basis than any other club. So don't ever go at us. But then you've got to ask, well, have players been signed because they've got a big social media profile and are good from the commercial department's point of view, as opposed to being good footballers? Now, this isn't a football show. That's not really our area to look at. But you're absolutely right, Kevin. How can you justify paying dividends when you've not delivered in terms of generating growth in terms of the value of the shares? And that's what the Glazers have failed to do. It was noticeable that they were quite happy to sell the shares last November when the share price was $21. It's now below $14. That's a fall in value of a third. But they still managed to find a dividend to pay in January, and they'll probably find that money to go and pay themselves one in a few months' time as well. And that really grates with United fans when things aren't good on the pitch.
I think what else grates with Man United fans, having spoken to some this week, is that Ten Hag is obviously a very good young manager. He's done a fantastic job at Ajax, but Pochettino has been making come and get me noises to the Glazers, but they've gone for, essentially, as Man United fans say, they've gone for the less expensive option. Yeah. It is how it seems to outsiders and to Man United fans. And again, that really grates when the Glazers are inevitably paying themselves more money this time next year. It will be off the back of the fact they haven't spent any of that money trying to lure one of the best young managers in world football to the club.
Yeah, and you can understand the frustration. They've got to start delivering on the pitch because all of the claims that we've got 1.1 billion fans. Well, 1.1 billion fans have now had to wait 9 years for a Premier League title, and I don't think many people will be putting a lot of money on United to win the Premier League next season either.
Or the season after that, I would guess. It's a terrible sign of our age, Kieran, that I can't see the name Bellingham without struggling to say Linda in front of it. Look her up, kids. But for men of my generation, Linda Bellingham, let's just say, was an influential figure. But Jude Bellingham, the sale of Jude Bellingham, has made a big difference to Birmingham City's latest accounts.
Yes, and to a certain extent has saved Birmingham City's bacon. Birmingham did have a financial fair play penalty of 9 points just over a year ago. They've been told by the EFL that they really need to get their house in order, but they lost 30 million quid. That's 600 grand a week. Every week, that's a ridiculous amount of money. Yeah. Yes, we know that it was a COVID year, but Birmingham don't generate a huge amount of money from matchday ticket sales anyway. So to blame all of that on COVID, I think is a bit of a smokescreen. Jude Bellingham, amazing footballer. I think when he went to Germany, Birmingham said, "Well, we're going to retire his shirt. We want him to have a legacy," and his legacy is that he dug them out of a hole.
Yeah.
Because they made a £26 million profit. That means that they've kept within the FFP limits, but that's a one-off. And the problem you got at Birmingham is that in the last decade, they've had £215 million worth of money coming into the club, and that includes, I think, 3-4 years of parachute payments.
Yeah.
215 coming in, and they've spent 255 million on wages. It's so you can't just say, "Well, they gambled one year." This is a constant inability to control costs or to have any form of quality control within their spending function, and it increases risk, especially when you've got owners who are based overseas and nobody's quite sure of their long-term motives or aims and ambitions for the club.
Yeah. Carlisle United have been on our list for a while now, and I find this news slightly worrying. The Supporters Trust have issued a public appeal to Pure Pay Retail to urgently discuss the matter of the club's debt.
Yes. Carlisle don't necessarily feature on a lot of people's radar, and it's a great day out. I remember the last time I went there, Warren Aspinall scored the winning goal, which dates me a wee bit, and Warren as well, I suspect. But just to give a bit of a backstory, Carlisle did have sort of a shareholder called Edinburgh Wooden Mill.
Yeah,
Woolen Mill, not wooden. The strange mill that made wood. But Edinburgh Woolen Mill went into administration with Carlisle owing that company around about 2.4 million. Now, what happened was that debt was sold on to a company called Pure Pay Retail. Yeah. And nobody's quite managed to work out what Pure Pay Retail's ambitions are. But for the last couple of years, when the Carlisle's accounts have come out, Pure Pay have effectively said a statement to the auditors or to the club, say, we don't want that money back for at least a year. But in the 2021 accounts, no such statement. And the Supporters Trust, who own shares in the Carlisle holding company, they own a minority share, they have been requesting meetings. They've been trying to communicate to Pure Pay to get some definitive response, because if Pure Pay are going to turn around at any one moment and say, that 2.4 mil, we want it in 4 weeks, 6 weeks time, we've got a problem. Now Carlisle actually made a profit in 21. The club has cut its cloth. It has addressed the issue of wages and so on. So it's actually run in my book as a pretty damn well run club, and it's one of the few clubs that will get 5 or 6 stars from the quality of the information they put out in the account. So they're actually very transparent, and all ticks all the boxes that I like to see. But all you have to do, Pure Pay, is talk to people, engage, communicate, allay the fears, and these fears are genuine from the Supporters Trust as to what are your intentions. And if the Supporters Trust know one way or the other, then at least they can plan. There is, if they demand that money back, we've got a crisis. It's an avoidable issue, and it can be solved in a simple manner. You just say, we don't want that money back for the next 12 months, or we want 10% of it back or 20% of it back, and at least people in Carlisle will have some degree of certainty. What we've got at present is a mess.
Well, it's precisely because of that uncertainty that they've been on our uh-oh list. But is it common practice in business, Kieran, the selling off of debt?
Yes. I mean, certainly when an organisation goes into administration, you can buy some of the individual assets from the administrators, and transference of debt is one of those. So it does happen. It can happen for benevolent reasons, and I think this was the hope of the Carlisle fan base when Pure Pay bought into this. But we're not getting any further information from them.
Hartlepool United have been awarded compensation because of the way Fulham treated a young player who'd come through Hartlepool's youth ranks.
Yes, this is the story of Luca Murphy. Now, Luca Murphy was a scholar at Hartlepool. He joined the club. He was spotted at the age of 9. He went through the scholar program, and Fulham spotted him at Hartlepool, and Fulham, by all accounts, offered a deal to Hartlepool, and they said, right, we'll take him on trial, but we'll offer you a deal. And what happened next, nobody's quite sure. But following that trial, and as far as Hartlepool is concerned, the offer came in first. Then Luca Murphy went off for the trial, and then Fulham said, following the trial, he's not good enough. We're going to reject him. Now, we've spoken about the way that football clubs treat young people before, and we don't know what happens. Only those close to him. There were issues, but Hartlepool released him because they said, following the rejection by Fulham, there was a noticeable change in demeanour, enthusiasm for the game, and so on. So they released him as a scholar, and lo and behold, 11 days later, he signs for Fulham.
Wow.
So what's all behind this, we don't know. Subsequently, I think he may have made one first team appearance or no first team appearance. It didn't work out for him at Fulham, and when his contract expired, he was released. But from Hartlepool's point of view, and the reason why they're pretty cheesed off with this is, in their opinion, Fulham made an offer, then went weird radio silence. So Fulham reported and effectively took up this case with the Professional Football Compensation Scheme, which has now awarded them a 6-figure sum from Fulham. But as Fulham have said, and Fulham's owner has said, this is peanuts to Fulham. We're fully aware that Fulham have been ripping up the Championship this season, and I think it's fairly well known that Fulham have got one player on £100,000 a week in the Championship.
Yeah.
The highest paid player. We don't need to name the player, but I think most people know who we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're talking 1 week's wages. Hartlepool United is, again, as an away fan, it's a great day out. There should be a plaque there because that's where I had my first date with the Baroness.
Indeed.
So, it's got fond memories for me, and this was during the pandemic, so that the club was living from hand to mouth, and it does show a certain degree of arrogance and lack of empathy and lack of care. I think from Fulham, who haven't conducted themselves particularly well. Hartlepool United are still here, which is great, and yes, they're going to get the compensation, but it shouldn't be like this. Club, if you make an offer, then abide by it.
I mean, two things, Kieran. First of all, the Baroness endeared herself to everybody she met at the live podcast because her version of that first night out in Hartlepool displayed slightly less enthusiasm than yours did. But also, Kieran, regardless of the economics here, regardless of how much Hartlepool got, and we seem to be saying this every second pod, we're talking about the physical and mental well-being of a young man.
Yeah,
it's just football's got to sort this issue out. It's just not right. Talking of not right, FIFA is going to launch its own TV streaming service to show World Cup matches, and who knows, what they could do is get some extra money by streaming court cases that are going to be upcoming with the various FIFA officials. They'll be more likely to pay for that for their streaming service to show World Cup matches. Why are they doing this, Kieran, when they're freely available to most people through normal broadcasters?
Right. Well, this streaming service is called FIFA Plus, and according to FIFA, this is going to help to democratise football. Well, and I kept a straight face when I read that as well.
Yeah.
And the aim is to have 40,000 matches available, which is great. Yeah, but the first set of matches, and this is where this is both a good thing and a bad thing. The first set of matches that FIFA are going to have available is going to be the Angolan Premier League.
Oh, okay.
Now, yeah, exactly. That's my view. Okay, Angolan Premier League. Am I going to watch it? Well, I don't tend to watch the Cypriot League. I don't tend to watch the Bolivian League. If you can pick these up on various channels or YouTube or so on. So, is there a market for this? We don't know. There's going to be 11,000 women's matches available as well. Now, if those matches are not being shown on domestic or TV, and it gives people an opportunity to see these matches, fill your boots. It's great. FIFA have said the app is going to be initially free. They're going to show archive matches. So I think the first archive matches, I think it's the 1982 West Germany versus Italy game, which you and I can probably still talk through minute by minute.
Yeah.
One of the great games of, and that's great. But ultimately, how many people are going to watch it? Because you can watch it on YouTube. It is 40 years old, which depressingly dates us. And we've seen all those goals in our head. So is actually an audience there for it, which is going to generate significant viewing figures? We'll have to wait and see. They're going to have some independent documentaries as well for both women's football and men's football. That's great. I think the first one is called Ronaldinho, the happiest man in the world, which I dispute because. Because I was happier when Glenn Murray re-signed for the Albion, so I'm not sure about that. So that's where they go. As far as the World Cup matches are concerned, I'm not convinced that FIFA will necessarily broadcast those, and the reason for that is the likes of the BBC, NBC, whoever it is in the States, they have paid FIFA an absolute fortune for the rights to broadcast. Now, there will be what's known as geo-blocking. So perhaps FIFA, if you've got a country which doesn't have the World Cup rights, FIFA could potentially broadcast there, but you wouldn't be able to use your FIFA Plus app in the UK because the matches have been bought by the BBC and ITV. How are they going to make money from this? Well, the whole thing about apps is that you pick up data about the users. And if this is popular, then FIFA will be able to harvest that data and they will be able to sell it on to marketing companies and so on. So that's where I think FIFA will make their money from. I don't think this is a bad thing. If it allows you to see football which you otherwise wouldn't see, then I can't see a downside. At the same time, trying to work out where it's going to go, I think FIFA, they want to show things like beach football and futsal and the FIFA World Club Championship, because if you think about it, this year, that ended up on Channel 4 because nobody bid for it. Sky weren't interested, BT weren't interested, and I think FIFA ended up selling it about a week or 2 weeks before the actual matches took place. So there's not. So if FIFA, I think they're going to say, well, if the traditional broadcasters don't want some of our stuff, we will find it. And if it allows us to see, the Cook Islands versus Malaysia in a World Cup qualifier, and it's a Thursday night and there's nothing better on telly, and if I've managed to stop the Baroness from watching Married at First Sight Australia Series 18, Episode 37, then I'll be there.
Do you know what? I think FIFA may have overestimated the desire of the modern football fan to sit through a whole game from 1992. I don't know if I've told you this before, but a friend of mine produced a show in London called Sing Along a Sound of Music, which was very, very successful, where on a Friday and Saturday night, an audience of mostly gay young men went along dressed as various characters from The Sound of Music. And the lyrics were put out. So they sang along to The Sound of Music. And it's a wonderful show, life-affirming experience. And one of them had this brilliant idea of doing a similar thing for the 1966 World Cup final, that they would show the whole game and they would encourage people to come along dressed as Michael Caine with rosettes and rattles, and they would sing all the songs. And they asked me to watch the game and to jot down the moments where they thought would be appropriate for singing and laughing. And after 15 minutes, I was begging them to let me fast forward it. It's simply one of the dullest games of football I've seen. The goals, fine, but the bits in between, this match played at walking pace essentially with numbers that have been sewn onto the shirts. That's how dull it was. You start looking at how tightly the shirts are tucked into these. Those numbers are sewn on. It's just, I don't think there is a market for people watching old games, to be perfectly honest. But speaking of which, and we're doing well on the segues tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Steve Hodge is selling Diego Maradona's Hand of God shirt. There were unkind people at the time, Kieran, who said that if Steve Hodge had shown half as much enthusiasm for catching up with Maradona when he scored that second goal as he did for catching up with him to get his shirt at the end of that game. But it turns out that he made a wise decision, because it's going to sell for quite a lot of money, apparently, isn't it?
Yes, the guide price is 4 to 6 million.
Wow.
Which is...
Wow.
But it is an iconic. But there's a fly in the ointment.
Oh.
Because it turns out that Diego Maradona wore 2 shirts for that match. He wore one in the first half, where he didn't score any goals. And he wore one in the second half where he did score the 2 goals. Now, Maradona in his autobiography, and Steve Hodge has also said, we did swap shirts at the end of the match, and this is the shirt from the second half. Diego Maradona's daughter has said, no, the real Hand of God shirt has gone to somebody else who mysteriously she wouldn't name. I think Sotheby's, whoever the auctioneers are confident. But clearly the first half shirt where Diego Maradona got kicked by Peter Reid and Terry Butcher for 45 minutes probably isn't as iconic as the second one. But Christie's are confident, and I think Steve Hodge has been asked on many occasions to sell it, and now. Well, you can understand that. What's the point in having it at home, or he's now at an age. We are talking many years later from that match itself. So I think it could be the most expensive sports shirt. I think it will exceed even the price for one of the baseball shirts of all time.
Well, do you know what, Kieran? I remember. I mean, at the time. It's probably the most angry I've ever been at a football match.
Me too.
Really angry, but age brings you hopefully some maturity and context, and what a fascinating character. Certainly, anyone who's been to Naples and you can see the effect that Maradona still has on that city. It's astonishing. His image is everywhere in that city, even now. So I'm not surprised it's going to make a lot of money, because it's probably one of the most iconic football items ever, really, isn't it? Let's think about it.
Yeah.
Stefan Symanski, Kieran, wrote a book, as we discussed earlier, called Soccernomics, which was probably the first time that the area of football finance was brought to a wider public. And it's still a book that's fascinating people now. You were lucky enough to interview him, and this is what he had to say.
Start your wellness journey at Whole Foods Market, where it's Jumpstart January through the 16th. Stock up on supplements with some of the year's biggest savings. Plus, save on air-chilled organic boneless skinless chicken breasts, organic Honeycrisp apples, organic large Hass avocados, and more. And since Whole Foods Market is the only certified organic national grocer, it's easy to make them your wellness destination. Jumpstart your January now at Whole Foods Market.
Stefan, thanks so much for coming on the show. I'm absolutely made up because you're one of my heroes. You're responsible for my my entry into the world of football and finance. So I owe you a huge amount.
Yeah, and you still haven't. I gave you my bank account details, and it's still not arrived. So yeah, you need to sort that out.
I will do. So you wrote Soccernomics. I've written a book on football and finance, and I found it a really painful experience. How was it for you?
Oh well, so unlike you, I didn't try to do it on my own. I enlisted Simon Cooper. I actually spent a long time teeing up Simon. It was a conspiracy on my part, which took about 2 years because I knew he was the guy to write a book with if I was going to write a book, and it worked out a dream. That's my advice to you for your next book: get a co-author.
Right, I might very well take that on board. Watch this space. I'll say no more than that. Sort of having read the book, one of the big things which came through was the link between costs driving success on the pitch in the form of wages. Now, would it be fair to say we're effectively, for one of the conclusions is that wages are probably responsible for 90% of success. You've got the manager perhaps throwing in 5% and lady luck, the other 5%. And even with my accounting head on, I can make that equal 100. Or is that being oversimplistic?
Well, I definitely think it's something like that. I mean, it depends on a lot of this depends on your time horizon, how long you're looking at. So the games this week, I like, thinking about the Chelsea Real Madrid game last night. I mean, there was a hell of a lot of luck in that game, in both ways, right? And that game could have turned out very differently. But the thing is, if you play these games over and over again, the team with the highest paid players is going to win. And the thing that's important is that it's not that that's a statistical truth, but the question is, why is it true? And the important thing to grasp is it's true because of the way the market for players work. There is an incredibly competitive market for players, and the ability of players is very well understood by pretty much everyone engaged in the market. And that's why the wages have to reflect your ability. And if they don't, if you're getting underpaid, then you just get bid away by somebody else. And if you're being overpaid, well, you'll soon find you're being dropped. So it's I've always stressed the point that it's the reason why the wage performance links work that's interesting, rather than the mere statistical fact.
Cool. So we now have a football system which is dominated by money, and do you think football is therefore dead as a romantic sport?
You're asking an economics professor whether there's any romance in the world at all. It's an odd question to ask. No, I mean, I think. Of course there is. I mean, of course there's a lot of. When I was in England, the team I always supported was Scunthorpe United, which was where my mother came from. And through thick and thin, I've watched them, and it's getting thin and very, very thin right now. It looks like they're going to drop out of the league this year, which is pretty depressing. And now I live in near Detroit. My team is Detroit City FC, and I just love them. And they're a very small team, and the football's not exactly the greatest you'll ever see, but they have the best fans, and going to a game at their stadium in Hamtramck in Detroit is just one of the best experiences you can have. So there's romance aplenty, but I have this sort of schizophrenic view of the world where I can separate my romantic engagement with the game from the statistical and economic analysis.
Right, yeah. And we had a bit of a chat before this interview on social media via a few messages, and one of the things which you said, which intrigued me, was it's time to abolish the transfer system. Could you expand upon that, please?
Well, I again, this is something I've been banging on about for quite a few years now, and it usually gets me into very big arguments because fans tend to be very upset with this. But the starting point to say is, who else do you know who, on being offered a new job by another employer, has to get the say-so of their current employer, and their would-be new employer has to pay their old employer the same, pay some money. There is no other job that I can think of where that happens. And if anyone you say to you in your job, so Kieran, you teach in a university. If somebody said to you, and if suppose the University of Michigan came to you and said, Kieran, we'd like you to come over to the United States and teach here. And then University of Liverpool said to you, no, hang on a minute, Kieran. Michigan has to give us some money before you can go. You'd say, get lost, and you'd have them in court before they knew what had happened, because that's completely unacceptable. And as I understand it, professional footballers are the only people treated like this. And this has never been justified and has never been agreed to by the players. There's no point where the players ever got together collectively and say, yeah, this is in our interests. And so the system needs to be really addressed. And the starting point should be to say, well, we should abolish it unless the teams are prepared to offer something to the players which would compensate them for this extraordinary withdrawal of their liberty.
Wow. Okay. That's intriguing, because, I mean, from just putting sort of the counter argument here, would there be any incentive for clubs to develop their own players then if they knew that those development costs would effectively be written off with a richer club coming in? And we are seeing, certainly under the elite player performance plan that we've got here in England, that is effectively happening. I'm just, from my point of view, I look at academies, I look at youth development, and it's an expensive exercise. And the transfer system is a very, very inelegant way of at least providing some acknowledgement for all of the investment that goes into players at a young age.
Well, so I think there are two aspects to this. So the most important aspect is to say, well, just if I said, Kieran, we're going to have an arrangement where I can just walk into your bank account and take your money whenever I feel like it, you might say, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. But then everybody said, well, yeah, but Kieran, actually, it's really good that Stefan gets to spend your money because he spends it on really good things. It's all very useful what Stefan spends your money on. So isn't that a good argument? Shouldn't you let that happen? To which you would say, no, get lost. I'm not interested in that. Well, probably something fruitier than that. But the fact that you're constraining people to do things which no one else is made to do can't be justified by saying, yeah, but some good comes out of it. So that I think is the first argument. And I think the important thing to bear in mind is whenever we talk about this, people think we're talking about people like Raheem Sterling or some of the Karim Benzema or some of the big players out there, Mo Salah. We're not talking about those players. There are something like maybe anywhere between 50 and 100,000 professional football players around the world, and more than half of them are earning probably less than £25,000 a year. So we're talking about people who are actually paid very little and are tied down. So what you really want to think about is somebody who's played for some little club somewhere, being paid paid beer money, and then they've got an offer from another club and they can't take advantage of that because their current club is saying, no, they got to pay me for it. And that's the iniquity of the system. So that's the first bit, right? If it's wrong, it's wrong, regardless of whether you think that there's some ancillary benefit to it. But then, if we address the question, would it affect training? I'm really not convinced that it would very much. I never believed that these training. There's the trickle down story that the small clubs are developing players and then they pass them on to the big clubs. I've never really believed that as a story, and the data doesn't really show that. If you look, as you have looked in the accounts, you can see that most of the small clubs generating very little revenue in the transfer system, and the transfer money is all going between the big clubs across Europe. And they're going to invest in training players regardless of what the compensation system is. So now I don't think it would have any significant impact on the training and development of players.
Cool. Brilliant. Right. That's one problem solved, because I think John Mark Bosman's lawyer has been talking about a test case with regards to the transfer system? And does it effectively provide players with a form of handcuffs for a few years? And I've been desperate for that case to go to court, but that one seems to have died recently. So
yeah, I think it did die, to be honest. So Jean-Louis Dupont is now more focused on the Super League, as far as what I hear.
In the States, what was the reaction to Super League? Because certainly there's quite a few American owners of English football clubs who seem to be in favour of it. What was the reaction of the fan base or the sort of you as an academic to this idea?
So I had a very good chance to get a real sense of that because I teach this to my students. So I explained to them what the deal was in the Super League, which was essentially in exchange for protection from having to compete for places, the big clubs would hand out a bit of money to the smaller clubs, most of whom are on the verge of bankruptcy and so need the money. And to pretty much every American I said who heard this story, they said, well, what's wrong with that? That sounds fine. And then when I explained to them just the intense hatred that people had for this idea, and the idea that it would undermine the system of qualification on sporting merit, it took them a long time to come around to it. But I think they did, and I think they start to get it. And I think what's happening in America here is that certainly amongst younger people, they're starting to recognize some of the virtues of the system of competition and starting to actually question some of the ways in which the American leagues are organized, which essentially protect the owners, the billionaires from any form of competition. So I think it's it's making a big change. And because the other thing to say is the very concept of promotion relegation, when I came 10 years ago, it was still a lot of people I had to go through this from day one of how does it work. And, it's like the Ted Lasso sketches. And many of them would, and many of them still insist on calling it promotion and regulation. So it's a hard concept for Americans to get their hands on, but it is starting. They are starting to get it, and they are starting to see the virtues. So it's interesting to see whether that will have any longer-term impact. Not at the moment, but it might do in the very long term.
Cool. Presumably, you see quite a bit of football in the States. We have, in terms of club football, very much the domination by European clubs when they play clubs from other continents. We've got this FIFA World Club Championship, which is inevitably won by a European team, and it's getting a bit tedious to a certain extent. Can you ever see a time when the MLS or South America or the Asian markets are genuine competitors for the best talent and therefore the opportunity to be called the best club in the world?
That's a really good question. But I'd want to break that into sort of two parts. I mean, we know that South America has been producing the best players, or many of the best players, for a very long time now. Also, I think it's quite plausible that the United States will start to produce, and possibly Canada, quite a lot of good talent as time goes by. If you think about people like Pulisic, they're starting to produce real talent. But in South America, the problem is that the economic organization of the leagues is so corrupt and so poorly run that those leagues struggle to compete. And also, the countries of South America are relatively poor, and so they can't really afford. Remember, it's mostly rich countries that can afford to hire the best players. And then I think in the United States, I think MLS is a different problem. MLS is trying to build a league that looks like the NFL. And the big thing about the NFL, no promotion and relegation. And the teams control the salaries. They bargain for salaries. And there's nowhere else for the players to go. If they don't play in the NFL, they don't get to go anywhere else. Whereas in the United States, in the MLS, what they're trying to do, they're trying to control salaries. They've got a salary cap and keep salaries down. but the problem is they're competing in a global market, and so they can't afford to attract the top talent. And so where MLS is right now is it's doing really well, or pretty well, in terms of attracting fans to watch games in stadiums. So teams like Seattle Sounders, Portland Timbers, Atlanta United, they're doing pretty well in terms of crowd sizes. They've had some really big crowds here, but nobody's watching it on TV. And people would rather watch Premier League on a Saturday, Sunday morning, which is when it's shown over here, than watch MLS on prime time as things stand.
Wow. Okay. So, and so, carrying on with sort of the theme of football in the US, and being old school South London, I refuse to use the word soccer because I've got my South London credentials on at present. We're in a World Cup here. We're already starting to look forward to, and we people are booking off time. And I had some friends around with some school kids last week, and one of the kids said, "Well, England's first match is 1 p.m. on a Monday. There's no way I'm going to school that day, Dad, am I?" Is there the same level of enthusiasm or any such enthusiasm in the States? Because USA playing England, USA playing Iran sound like pretty mouth-watering features to me.
Well, again, so I got several things I want to say about. So firstly, as a fellow South Londoner, I have to tell you that soccer is a word that was first coined at Oxford University in the 1890s. And was adopted by Americans from the UK. And we have a lot of evidence. And up until the 1970s, soccer was a perfectly acceptable word to use. So, for example, the autobiography of Sir Matt Busby was actually called Soccer at the Top. Not football at the top, soccer at the top. And there's endless cases with that. And the thing about the word soccer is that it went into disuse precisely when Brits started to realize that Americans use it all the time. So it's sort of an exile word. It was okay until Americans used it, and then it became unacceptable. And I've written a whole book about this with my co-author Silke Weineck. So it's Football, Not Soccer. So I want to put a plug in for that.
Of course.
But in terms of it, so the second thing to say is, bear in mind that the US men's team is pretty lousy, but the US women's team dominates everything, right? And the US women's team has a huge following here, and the Women's World Cup is an enormous thing, much bigger than in any other country. And so the men, in some ways, are riding on the coattails of the women. And yeah, there is a lot of enthusiasm. So at the last two World Cups, I think the last two World Cups, the biggest number of fans attending were actually from the United States. So, skip that. Not Russia, because of course they didn't qualify, but in Brazil and in South Africa, they were the largest contingent of fans attending. So there will be an enormous number of Americans going to Qatar, probably bigger than any other group. And yes, there will be an immense following, and they will believe that they can win it right until they're eliminated, right? So that's the American way. They just believe, right? Like Ted Lasso, they're just going to believe they can do it.
And you've mentioned Ted Lasso a couple of times, and it's Ted Lasso, by the way, is a very sensitive subject on this podcast, mainly due to the fact that my co-host and good buddy Kevin, they were auditioning for somebody to play the part of Kevin Day, effectively the character that he plays, and he was asked to audition to play himself, and he didn't get the part, and it still rankles.
Oh dear, yeah, no. Sorry. See that.
But has it made a difference? Because we hear anecdotally back home that there's been an increase in interest in the Premier League, and there's people talking about going to Crystal Palace, which, as everybody knows here, is a small club, simply because Ted Lasso was filmed there and so on. Or is it overplayed in terms of what we're hearing this side of the pond?
Well, I mean, one thing it's useful to remember is that football has always been a big sport in the United States. I mean, it has a long history. They've been playing the game here since the 1890s. So it's not, and people confuse the fact that there's never been a very successful men's league in the United States with the idea that people don't know about it or are not interested in it. And what there is, of course, it's not like the NFL. It's not like baseball. It doesn't have that big of a following, but most people are familiar with it to some degree. And certainly its popularity is growing, and its popularity is growing in the 18 to 34 age group, which the marketeers always say is the most important. And things like Ted Lasso are having an effect, I think. But I always say to people, the biggest effect in terms of raising the popularity of sport is the video game. And the FIFA video game is huge in the United States. And that has made a generation of kids really familiar. And I know this going the opposite direction, because when we moved to the US, my middle son, he went into a high school here at the age of 16. And he was able to slot into the NFL talk on day one. He knew the names of all the players and what the positions were, and he knew everything. And the reason was that he'd been playing the Madden NFL game for 2 years. So I think and what you're seeing is in America, I think you're seeing a bit of the reverse of that. You're seeing the FIFA game has really caught on. And again, generation of kids really, really know their football or soccer, as they would say. Actually, that's the other funny thing. Whenever they talk to me, they say soccer, and then they say, I'm terribly sorry, I mean football. Because Brits get upset when Americans call it soccer, but Americans are desperate not to offend us. So remember that next time you're insisting that it's football, not soccer.
Well, I still struggle with amortization with a Z, or a Z, in fact, because I'm currently writing a course for somebody, and I sent it off, and they said no, you can't use amortization with an S. Okay, what this is absolutely appalling. You know, we invented amortization in football, not anybody else.
Hang on. They had amortization in baseball in the 1940s. So I think that's, that. In fact, what they've done in America, they got a tax exemption for amortization for baseball, that's really the incredible thing. So they get the tax deduction twice. So they can expense it on the profit and loss account, and they can take it out, get an allowance of tax against the balance sheet value. So there you go. So they know all about amortization with a Z.
Okay, fair enough. In terms going back to some of the issues that we're seeing at present, I presume that you wouldn't be over keen on financial fair play version 1. What's your first thoughts on financial fair play, or whatever ludicrous acronym we now have to deal with from 2022 onwards that have been introduced by UEFA, where the word fair has finally, and rightly so, because it was never fair to begin with, the word fair has been removed, and we've now got this 3-tier approach. Have you had a chance to look at the proposals?
Yeah, I haven't. I've looked at it, but I don't think they published the full details yet of how it's going to work. But again, this is a luxury tax idea that is taken from baseball. Baseball has a luxury tax which works in sort of similar way, and I mean, yes, I was very opposed to the original financial fair play, and yes, I wrote many times about how it's anything but fair. And I think the way to understand this is basically allowing UEFA to seem like they're doing something, whilst at the same time serving the interests of the big clubs. Because the big clubs, they don't want to spend lots of money on players. They want an agreement to cap salaries, and the point is that that's in their interest, so that the billionaires can make more money out of the game. And that's what I never get, is why fans would ever be in favor of regulation, which just serves the financial interests of billionaires.
Excellent. I think we're definitely singing from the same hymn sheet, because I shout similar things, and people say you don't understand. You're not looking after your own club. But I think I'm entirely in agreement with you. Just going back to the World Cup, we've got the 2026, and this is a bit of self-interest here. We've got the 2026 World Cup taking place in US, Canada, and Mexico. Where will be the nearest venue to you?
That's a good question. So I think so. There isn't. I'm nearest to Detroit, which had games in the 1994 World Cup, but is not getting any games this time. So I think there's games in Chicago. So that's about a 4-hour drive from where I am. But you can come here anytime, Kieran. Anytime you feel like dropping in, and I'll show you the sights of Detroit if you're interested.
Oh yeah, I've seen Detroit in a few movies, and it's different.
It's not nearly as scary as they make out. And Detroit City FC is one of the best football games you'll go to anywhere. So you should come over and try it.
Well, that sounds like a deal. So Stefan, thank you so much. I'm genuinely made up to get to talk to you at last, because, as I say, it was your book that has led to me being where I am today, wherever I am today, and nobody's quite sure. So thank you so much for coming on the show. And if there's anything that we can do for you in terms of the lunacy of football finance, just give me a shout.
Oh, yes, there's plenty you can do for me. So I'll definitely be taking you up on that. And of course, I should say the 5th edition of Soccernomics will be out in October with 3 new chapters, I think. So.
Oh, sounds like a challenge.
It's a fascinating interview, Kieran. The idea about abolishing transfer fees is an interesting one, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Stefan's viewpoint is, why should football be treated in a unique manner? If you or I were offered, let's say the Swiss Ramble phones you up and says, we'll double the money. Actually, if you need more,
40 quid. Wow.
To come on a podcast, we'd have to say goodbye, and you'd be able to leave. So why is it that footballers are tied to clubs on long-term contracts? And again, as Stefan said, the vast majority of professional footballers around the world are earning less than 25 grand a year. So it is a restraint on trade.
Yeah.
And are our views skewed by the huge numbers that we see in the Premier League, and the fact that perhaps we do, and I fall into this trap as well. We see these young men as commodities which can benefit our club owners, and is that right? Because I'm not sure. And as much as a Brighton fan, we all are extremely grateful for everything that Tony Bloom's done for our club. But I'm not sure that he taught Ben White to be a defender, who subsequently was bought for £50 million, and I think it's fair to say hasn't had his 2 greatest performances in the last two matches.
Yeah, there's not enough money out there, Kieran, to entice me onto another pod. Basically, Chris Sutton on 606 might say that means I lack ambition, but I am happy to be the Matt Letizia of football finance podding. I will stay and see what success we can bring to my local pod. And if at the end of a 15-year career we still haven't been promoted or won anything, I shall look back on with some satisfaction on the work that I've done, and then hopefully get myself a job as a pundit on some kind of pod-related TV show where I watch live pods going out and comment on them as they go through, and then, in true Matt Letizia style, turn into a bizarre right-wing conspiracy theorist. But while we're still doing the pod, Kieran, and we're not getting the big bucks, you might like to help us by making a small monthly contribution to our pod. And if you'd like to do that, and remember, it's always going to be free to air, then you can go to patreon.com/priceoffootball. And if you have a question you'd like answered on our Monday questions pod, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thanks as always for the support and the interaction. We genuinely appreciate it. We will be announcing, we will be putting out on social media, probably in the next 24 to 48 hours, details of how you can come and see us if you want to at Accrington Stanley on May the 10th. And it will be great. If it's anything like the Wimbledon show, we will have a blast, and hopefully you will too. You can support us on Patreon for as little as £1 a month. But you don't have to go down that route if you don't want to. We know that money is tight for everybody, but you can give us some good karma by going on to your podcast app and hopefully giving us 5 stars if you're enjoying what we're putting out. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you say. You could say you would rather have the show presented by Len McCluskey and Nigel Havers. And what a show that would be. Yeah, I'd subscribe to that, and hopefully you will too.
Yeah, Nigel Havers, of course, is Jack Whitehall's godfather.
Is he?
Yes. And you'll be pleased to know that Nigel Havers in real life is exactly how he is on screen. He's one of the most charming men you can ever meet, but he's one of those men, even at his age, you become invisible when he's in the room. He just has this kind of pheromone thing that women just, like Mr. Darcy style, just swoon. It's like I remember walking down a corridor with Gary Lineker once, and like literally 18 women just stopping and watching him go by, and you just want to turn around and say to them, he can't do crosswords, you know. He's got no hair on his body, but it's just has something about him that I haven't got, Kieran. So, but Len McCluskey, on the other hand, I'd like to think I probably am sexier than Len McCluskey. So that's something I can look back on when I'm older, when I tell the grandkids, how sexy were you, Granddad? I was somewhere between Len McCluskey and Nigel Havers.
That's a pretty broad church.
It's a pretty. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.